In a small town where the justice system was anything but just. One man's wrongful arrest set off a chain of events that would unravel a powerful and corrupt machine. Darius Carter, a successful businessman, thought he was just passing through Riverdale. Little did he know, he was about to expose a web of corruption that had been hidden for years. With the help of his brother, U.S. Attorney General Jordan Carter, Darius fought to bring the truth to light. This is the story of how one man's fight for justice changed the lives of many. Subscribe to the channel to begin today's story with life stories. It was the kind of day where the air felt heavy with secrets. The late afternoon sun had already started to stretch its golden fingers across the land, painting everything with a calm, almost eerie stillness. As I drove through the winding, unfamiliar roads of Riverdale, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. I had been through countless business meetings, had enough success in the boardrooms to never doubt my place in the world. Yet there was something about this town, the kind of town where everyone knew everyone's business, that made me feel out of place. It wasn't just the sign at the edge of the town, its paint peeling away like the stories of people who had lived their entire lives here and never ventured beyond. Population 15,000. It read, with a quiet sense of finality, as though this place had already decided what your future would look like the moment you arrived. I wasn't from here, I was just passing through. But I knew immediately that I was an outsider. I had only needed to stop for gas. But even as I pulled up to the weathered pump, I could feel the shift in the atmosphere. People who had been going about their business moments before suddenly stopped, staring, watching, scrutinizing. I tried to dismiss it, but the unease settled in deeper. I told myself I was overthinking it. After all, I had a meeting earlier that day. It had gone well. I had knocked it out of the park. As my brother Jordan would say. He'd texted me right after, just as I was filling my tank, asking how it went. I smiled at the thought of him, my older brother, the U.S. Attorney General, the one person I could always count on when everything else seemed so uncertain. It was as I texted him back, letting him know I was taking a shortcut home through this town, that the first hint of something wrong caught my attention. The police cruiser across the street had been parked there too long, its occupants staring at me with an intensity that felt unsettling. I didn't panic, though. I was used to being watched. Being in business, you get accustomed to people checking you out, reading you before they even meet you. But this felt different. This wasn't just a casual glance. I drove on, trying to shake the feeling. I kept to the speed limit, my hands at 10 and 2. Exactly how I had learned to drive as a young man. But then the lights came on, red and blue flashing in my rearview mirror. My heart skipped a beat. But I kept my exterior calm, just as I had been taught to do in high-pressure situations. This was nothing I hadn't dealt with before. In the boardrooms, the stakes were high. But here, on this empty road, with the world around me feeling so small, I was in control, or at least, I thought I was. When the officer walked up to my window, I was ready. He didn't even look at me when he spoke. His voice carried the kind of authority that demanded compliance. No questions asked. License and registration, he said, a thin smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I'd like to know why I'm being pulled over first. I replied, keeping my tone measured, professional, a power move, but one that had worked for me in every room I'd ever stepped into. Your tail lights out, he said, his eyes never meeting mine as he handed me the ticket. Something about his attitude felt rehearsed, like he had done this 1,000 times before. It was almost as though he was waiting for me to say something. Anything that would give him the reason he needed to escalate this. I shook my head. That's impossible. I had the car serviced last week. I handed him my papers, feeling the coolness of the interaction settling in. Something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. That was when the other officer moved to the back of my car. Officer Decker. His nameplate read. I noticed how he handled himself. He wasn't just checking my vehicle. He was inspecting it, like he had seen something he wasn't supposed to. And then it happened. Officer Decker found something. A small bag of drugs. Conveniently, discovered, in my trunk. Look what we found, Decker said, holding it up as though it was just another day at the office. But I knew better. This wasn't just a routine stop. They had planned this. Set this up. I could feel it. That's not mine, I said firmly, even as my mind raced. I demanded to see the body camera footage. I demanded proof that this had been a legitimate search. But the officers weren't concerned with my demands. They weren't concerned with my rights. They were doing what they had been doing for years. Targeting people like me. Making sure the system kept running as it always had. Profitable, efficient, and cruel. The moment the handcuffs clicked shut around my wrists, the weight of it all hit me. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. This was something bigger, something much darker. I had been wrongfully arrested. Yes. But I had also uncovered something that was eating away at the soul of this country. A machine that destroyed lives. Fed by corruption and lies. As they shoved me into the back of the cruiser, I couldn't help but think of my brother, Jordan, the one person who would make sure this machine came to a halt. The one person who could tear this all apart from the highest office in American justice. I sat there, in the back of that cruiser, my mind swirling with thoughts of what was to come. I hadn't just stumbled upon a corrupt police department. I had stumbled upon a system. A system that was about to be exposed. One arrest at a time. I remember the silence in the back of the police cruiser. It wasn't the quiet of calm, but the kind of silence that comes when everything starts to feel wrong. As the red and blue lights flashed outside, the rhythmic hum of the car was the only sound. I had been through worse, I thought, but somehow, this time felt different. The car was a capsule of cold indifference. And as the officer drove me to the station, I could feel my heartbeat growing louder in my chest. I knew something was coming. But I couldn't quite place it. I had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went. Nor did I realize how far-reaching the machine I had stumbled upon really was. I tried to calm myself. Tried to remember the training my brother Jordan had given me. Keep your head. Stay composed. You've been in tougher spots. But this wasn't a boardroom meeting where words could be carefully chosen and situations controlled. This was raw, real, and I was a target. Thrown into a game I had no idea how to play. The station came into view, a squat, nondescript building that looked far more like a fortress than a place meant to serve the public. The darkness of the tinted windows suggested a world hidden from the outside. A world where secrets were locked away, safe from scrutiny. The office's presence, the coldness of the structure, felt like a warning, a signal that what I had just uncovered wasn't just about a wrongful arrest. They led me inside with no words. Barely a glance exchanged. The booking area smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. A combination that felt oddly fitting for the place where lives went to be altered. Erased. Or destroyed. The officer at the desk barely looked up when they shoved me forward. And I felt the weight of their indifference. The routine was set. The system was in motion. You've got a fancy car. Fancy suit. One officer muttered under his breath. As though trying to justify their actions. I didn't care about their words. I cared about what they were doing. And I could feel, deep in my gut, that this was no mistake. They weren't just targeting me, they were playing a game. A dangerous, profitable game that ran deeper than I ever imagined. Don't worry, I said as they started processing me. I'm going to make sure everything you're doing here gets exposed. That was when they laughed. Cold, dismissive. They didn't take me seriously. They didn't have to. They had been doing this for years. Arresting the wrong people. Fabricating evidence. Watching families tear apart. Lives ruined. All to make sure their quotas were met. Their pockets lined. As the hours dragged on, I began to realize something chilling. This wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about racial profiling or police misconduct. This was a system, a machine, designed to profit from the destruction of lives. And it had been running unchecked for far too long. But the thing about machines is that they can be broken. They have weaknesses. And one thing that this machine didn't count on was me. It didn't count on the fact that I wasn't just another easy target. It didn't know that I had something none of their other victims possessed. A brother who could bring it all down. My mind raced. Not with fear but with strategy. They didn't know it yet. But I had a weapon they couldn't defeat. And as I sat in that cold, sterile holding cell, I knew that my next move was one they hadn't planned for. Jordan, my brother, the U.S. Attorney General, He wasn't just some political figure in Washington. He was my advocate, my protector, and right now, he was the only thing standing between me and the nightmare I had just walked into. I leaned against the cold concrete wall, gathering my thoughts. They could lock me in this cell, strip me of my rights. But they couldn't take my resolve. They couldn't take my drive. And they couldn't take my connection to Jordan. The moment I made that call, everything would change. But first, I had to survive long enough to make it. As the night dragged on, I realized just how deeply I was embedded in this twisted web. It wasn't just about me anymore. This was bigger than I had ever imagined. And I wasn't going to be another statistic, another life swallowed by a system that had long since stopped caring. I had a brother who could tear it apart from the inside. And I would be damned if I didn't fight with everything I had to make sure it happened. It was time to expose them. It was time to tear their perfect machine apart. The hours passed in a blur. The sound of distant voices outside my cell faded into an indistinguishable hum. And I was left with nothing but my thoughts. I had been processed, fingerprinted, and photographed, all the motions of a system designed to dehumanize. To strip away any sense of individuality and make you just another number in their game. But I wasn't just another number. I wasn't just some criminal passing through. I was something else. Someone they didn't account for in their well-oiled machine. I could feel the weight of my phone call in my chest. Each minute making it more important. More crucial. This was the moment that would break it all open. The moment I would connect with Jordan. He wouldn't just be my brother anymore. He would be the force that would bring this corrupt system to its knees. I knew the odds. I knew they were playing dirty. That they had everything on their side. But they had underestimated one thing. They had arrested the wrong man. The door to the holding cell clanged open. My eyes snapped to it. A mixture of hope and tension rising in my chest. It was time. They were going to give me my phone call. And when I made it, I knew the game would change. But there was a strange sense of foreboding. I wasn't sure if it was just the claustrophobia of the cell or the knowledge that everything was about to get much bigger than I could have ever imagined. Officer Langley, the one who had pulled me over, stood in the doorway. His face was unreadable, but I could see a flicker of something. Something that told me he wasn't as sure about the system as he had been earlier. Maybe it was the fear of getting caught. Or maybe it was the discomfort of the uncertainty. Either way, it was clear that things were starting to crack. You get one call, he said, his voice flat. I nodded, rising to my feet. The phone was cool against my ear. And for a moment, I simply stood there, listening to the dial tone. When the familiar voice of my brother Jordan finally came through, it was as though a wave of relief washed over me. Jordan, I said, my voice calm but tight. I'm at Riverdale Police Station. They've set me up. They've planted drugs in my car. I've been arrested on falsified charges. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Jordan's voice, sharp and measured, cut through the tension. Are you hurt? I'm fine, I replied quickly. But I've uncovered something here. They're running a racket, falsifying arrests, planting evidence, targeting specific people for profit. They've been doing this for years. Jordan, this isn't just a case of mistaken identity. It's bigger than that. I could hear the wheels turning in his mind. Jordan wasn't just any lawyer. He was the U.S. Attorney General, and if there was anyone who could tear apart a system like this, it was him. But even I knew that what I was telling him wasn't something he could fix overnight. This was a war, not a battle. I'll be there soon. Darius, he said, his voice resolute. Stay calm. Stay safe. I'll get to the bottom of this. As I hung up, I felt a strange sense of power. It was as though, in that moment, I had crossed a line. Something irreversible had happened. And now it wasn't just about me. It was about justice. It was about survival. And for the first time since I was pulled over on that quiet road, I felt like I had a fighting chance. But I couldn't rest easy. I knew that the officers here, the ones who were playing their parts in this grand scheme, wouldn't let me walk free. Not without a fight. They had far too much to lose. As I sat back down on the cold bench in the holding cell, I couldn't help but think of how many others had fallen through the cracks of this system. How many people had been trapped in this web of lies and corruption without anyone to help them. How many families had been torn apart by officers like Langley and Decker? Who had done this with no fear of reprisal? How many lives had been ruined? Just to keep the machine running. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everyone who had been caught in this trap. For every person who had been wrongfully imprisoned. For every family that had been shattered by a corrupt system. I didn't know how long I would have to wait. But I knew that soon. My brother would be here. And when he arrived, things would change. The machine they had built would come apart. Piece by piece. The hours stretched on, each minute passing like an eternity. I remained in that small, dimly lit holding cell, the walls closing in around me. The quiet hum of the police station seemed to mock my frustration. A reminder of the indifference that pulsed through this place. It was a machine, perfectly designed to grind people like me into dust. I was just one more cog in their well-oiled operation. A victim among many. But something had shifted. I had a brother in a position of unimaginable power. And he was about to tear this whole system apart. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the station, the door to my cell opened again. This time, it was Officer Decker, the one who had planted the evidence in my car. His expression less certain than before. For a moment, I wondered if he had started to question the role he played in this mess. But it was clear he was just following orders. Still, the hesitation in his eyes made me wonder how long it would take for him to crack. He didn't say a word as he led me out of the cell and into the booking area. The room was cold and sterile. The fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. It felt like a place where time didn't exist. Where people were processed and discarded without thought. I could see the other officers moving about. Their faces void of any empathy or understanding. To them, I was just another statistic, a body to be thrown in jail and forgotten. Your brother's on his way. Decker finally muttered, almost as if trying to offer some form of reassurance. But it was empty. I wasn't worried about Jordan's arrival. I knew he would come. And when he did, everything would change. I was more concerned about the time I had to wait. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity. And I could feel the pressure building within me. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every person who had ever been caught in this web of corruption. Every innocent life that had been destroyed by this system. My thoughts were interrupted as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the hallway. I turned, my heart leaping in my chest. I recognized the confident stride even before I saw his face, Jordan. He walked toward me with the same calm, determined presence he had always carried. But this time, it was different. There was an intensity in his eyes. A fire that I hadn't seen before. He didn't say anything as he approached. Just placed a firm hand on my shoulder. The weight of it more comforting than any words could be. I could see the quiet strength in his eyes. The understanding of what I had just gone through. And the promise that he wasn't going to let this stand. I've got this, he said quietly, his voice low but steady. It was a statement, not a question. I didn't need to say anything in response. I just nodded. My brother had arrived, and I knew that the tide was about to turn. Jordan turned toward the officers in the booking area. The air seemed to shift as his presence filled the room. His authority immediately recognized. He wasn't just the Attorney General. He was my brother. And now he was here to make sure this corrupt system would pay for what it had done. The officers were now on edge. I could see it in their eyes. In the way they shuffled their feet. Trying to maintain some semblance of control. But they knew, deep down, that the moment Jordan stepped in, their little game was over. They weren't dealing with just anyone anymore. They were dealing with the full force of the law. Where's the evidence? Jordan asked, his voice sharp, cutting through the tension. The officers hesitated. They knew they had already lost. But they were trying to salvage whatever they could. Decker, the one who had planted the evidence in my car, looked between his colleagues, his face pale. He knew what was coming. He couldn't hide from the truth much longer. I want everything. The records, the files, everything you've got, Jordan continued. His gaze never wavered from the officers. His eyes filled with quiet fury. I could see them cracking. Their confidence slipping away. And I knew this was only the beginning. The machine they had built, the system they had relied on for so long, was about to crumble. In that moment, I felt the weight of everything I had just been through, the fear, The uncertainty, the sense of helplessness. But I also felt something else. The power of truth, the power of justice, and the power of a brother who would stop at nothing to make sure the right thing was done. The officers couldn't hide behind their lies anymore. The truth was coming. And it wasn't just about me. It was about everyone they had wronged. Everyone they had hurt. And it was time to expose it all. As Jordan's presence dominated the room, the air shifted from tension to palpable fear. It was as if the walls themselves had heard his voice and responded. Quivering under the weight of what was to come, Officer Decker and the others shuffled nervously. Their bravado from moments before now gone. I could see it in their eyes. The realization that they had no more control. The moment my brother arrived, their perfect little system was already starting to unravel. Jordan stood tall, unwavering, his voice calm but firm as he demanded access to the evidence. The officers exchanged glances, clearly unsure of how to proceed. They were no longer sure of their power. And it showed in every movement they made. The game they had been playing for so long was about to be exposed for what it truly was: corruption, exploitation, and greed, all woven into the fabric of the justice system. I watched as the officers fumbled, trying to keep their composure. I could see Officer Langley, the one who had initially pulled me over, standing off to the side, his eyes darting nervously between Jordan and his colleagues. I could tell he wasn't used to feeling like this. He wasn't used to someone standing up to the system, especially not someone who could dismantle it with just a few words. It was in his body language, the way his shoulders hunched slightly, as if trying to shrink back from the situation he had helped create. "What do you think you're doing?" Langley asked, his voice shaky, trying to regain some semblance of authority. But it was too late. He knew, deep down, that there was nothing he could do to stop what was coming. Jordan didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. His presence spoke volumes. He simply walked toward the desk where the officers had been storing the evidence, his gaze never leaving theirs. The atmosphere was thick with the unspoken truth that the jig was up. I stood there, still handcuffed, but for the first time since I had been arrested, I felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about everything they had done to countless others. This was about the families who had been torn apart by a corrupt system that had gone unchecked for far too long. This was about the innocent lives they had destroyed in their pursuit of profit. Jordan didn't waste any time. He moved with precision, commanding the room as he called for federal agents to be brought in. I knew the stakes were high. But at that moment, I could see the wheels of justice finally turning. The officers may have thought they were untouchable. But they were wrong. They had underestimated Jordan, and now it was time to pay the price. I could hear the faint sounds of footsteps in the distance. The agents were arriving. I knew what that meant. This was no longer a local matter. The federal government was now involved, and the investigation into the corruption at Riverdale Police Station would spread far beyond these walls. The officers were being backed into a corner, and they knew it. For a brief moment, I let myself breathe. I had survived the worst of it. But I knew this was just the beginning. The federal agents would be here soon. And once they arrived, the floodgates would open. Every hidden truth, every lie, every corrupt action would come to light. It was no longer about protecting the system. It was about exposing it for what it truly was. A machine designed to profit off the suffering of the innocent. Jordan looked over at me, his expression softening for just a moment. "You did good, Darius. You held it together." I nodded, but my thoughts were already racing ahead. What was to come would be even bigger than I had ever imagined. The evidence was only the beginning. The real fight would be in dismantling the network of corruption that had spanned years. Fed by money, power, and greed, the battle for justice was far from over. And now, more than ever, I knew I couldn't do it alone. Together, with Jordan's help and the full force of the law behind us, we would bring this corrupt system crashing down. But first, we had to expose the heart of it all. And that was exactly what we were about to do. As the federal agents moved in, the once composed officers now looked like frightened children, cornered by the truth they had spent years running from. The evidence they had tried so hard to hide was now being exposed. And there was no escaping the weight of their actions. Every file, every record, Every lie had been meticulously documented. The system they had built, one that preyed on the vulnerable, destroyed families, and profited from misery, was finally crumbling. But this wasn't just about bringing down a few corrupt officers. It was about sending a message that no one, no matter how powerful, could operate above the law without consequences. My brother, Jordan, stood at the forefront of this battle, his calm confidence unwavering as he led the charge. Together, we had managed to turn the tide. But as I looked around at the unfolding chaos, I knew that this was just the beginning. The ripple effect of our actions would reach far beyond Riverdale. It would change the way justice was served, and it would force those in power to confront their complicity. I couldn't help but think of all the others who had suffered, who had never had the chance to speak out. For them, for everyone who had been wronged, I knew we had to keep going. The fight for justice, for truth, was far from over. The sound of footsteps echoed through the station as more officials were taken into custody, their faces pale with fear. We had won, but there was much more to uncover. And with the world watching, we were determined to make sure that the corrupt machine, once so secure, would never rise again. If you enjoyed this story and want to stay updated on more life-changing stories, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Every story has the power to change a life. Don't miss out on the next one.